Schumacher College was an incredible time in my life where I was able to access a way of seeing and knowing that I could never have anticipated. Meeting people from all over the world and getting to know them in such a deep way through community allowed me to perceive different perceptions and understand other ways of knowing and other ways of living on this beautiful planet. I would like to introduce quickly a quote by Lawrence van der Post, who said that today we overrate the rational values and behave as if thinking were a substitute for living. We have forgotten that thought and the intuition that feeds it only become whole if the deed grows out of it as fruit grows from the pollen on a tree. This quote by Lawrence van der Post really hit home for me because it allowed me to see the world not just from my rational way of knowing and seeing. It allowed me to deepen the intuition and the sensory and the feeling experience that is also a whole within our being. My time at Londolozi Game Reserve really allowed me to see this as I tracked leopards and lions and cheetah and giraffe and hippos, and I couldn't use my rational mind to experience the world. I needed to use the intuition and the sensory to experience the animals out there. So with this understanding of how do we begin to deepen our other ways of knowing, I tried to do this in Brazil and this thesis to track the social dimension of a place. And how does this allow us to deepen our way of seeing? How might tracking Gaia on this planet also help us see this world as animate and alive? For everything is alive. The trees, the birds, the flowers, the rivers are all interacting with each other in such a way that allows us to live in this planet. Nothing is by chance. It's all part of a system and that is alive, that is interconnected. And Gaia theory has really brought this home for me because it's allowed me to see that nothing is separate. Nothing lives in parts. Everything is based on a relationship. And now this takes me into Gregory Bateson's work, who allowed me to see that the world isn't in separated parts. It is based on how the relationship of things interact in an ecosystem to create the outcome that it does. So the more that we begin to allow ourselves to see the relationships in the world, the more we can connect it with it, both from our mind, from our body and our spirits. It will allow us to understand and connect to the stories of our past and the stories of the stars and the stories of our people amongst the land and the stars that interconnected them. Schumacher College really allowed me to experience myself and really deepen the self and understand who I am as a person, what my self-value was. What I loved so much about living in community was this idea of living with people that can help and support you and allow for the wisdom of the elder to influence us growing as we grow older. With this ancient wisdom and other forms of wisdom from our elders, I was able to see life in a much deeper way. And I would walk through the forests of Dartington and really look at the nature and allow that nature to inspire me. It helped me to come to insights like nature is all giving and gives us everything. It gives us air, it gives us nutrients, it gives us food. And our mentality has been so blinded by this way of seeing and knowing that it has not allowed us to see the world as the gift that it really is, and the gift of giving. This time at Schumacher College was incredible, and it gave rise to my adventures around Brazil and Africa that were to follow. I spent 2.5 months traveling through Brazil from the south all the way to the north in the Amazon River. And after 2.5 months I was back in Cape Town, South Africa, and beginning my next journey in the Cederberg Mountains to learn more about how nature and children can connect with one another. This connection with the child and nature rang so deep within me that it allowed me to look deeper into what tracking is and what does it mean to track not only the self but the world in which exists from the self. So, beginning with the thesis, I rewrote a journal through my time at Brazil where I looked into all the things that I was experiencing. And starting from tracking, I looked into the designs of the natural world, and then from the designs, looking at my place in the universe and how I can learn from the story of our universe. I then looked into the social systems that interconnect the ecological systems, and how those social systems see their place in the stars, see their place within stories, and the designs that connect themselves to the stories. And finally, I was very interested to see how the philosophy of a tracker, the mindset of a tracker, might influence a way of seeing and help us connect to the world. With all of this in mind, I now invite you to follow my story on how we can track ourselves from within to the world without. Suid-Afrikaner.
What flag is it?
South Africa.
Wow, focus, Matheus.
Focus, Matheus.
Okay.
Alright.
Yeah.
Ecological design thinking for me has been a process of unlearning. To begin to sit and listen to the world around me, the non-human others, and begin to see their perspectives and their perceptions of the world that they live in, has allowed me to see that this world is a lot more interconnected and interwoven than I was seeing before. The thinking aspect, I think, is the point where we look at how we have a signature on this earth. You know, when we cut down a tree, we leave a signature, and that signature will be read by the generations to come. And so I think it's important that we think about the signature that we create on this earth, because the generations that are to come after us, I can imagine, would love to experience the same things that we are experiencing, from the trees in the Amazon River to the rock paintings in the Cederberg Mountains. How can we begin to grow a way of seeing that allows us to connect with the generations that are still to come? And ecological design thinking has allowed me to stop and listen to the world around me and begin to see a way forward that isn't so destructive to the natural world and to ourselves.
19, eh?
Give him one more chance.
Give him one more chance.
So much love. Give me the hat.
Give me one more chance.
Give me one more chance, sir.
You know, it's only just started at Schumacher College. You know, and we had to try and describe what does ecology mean, what does design mean, and what does it mean to think.
So the latest, the latest science shows that biodiversity is incredibly important for regulating the climate of the Earth and for keeping our climate relatively stable. And yet, what are we doing to the global biodiversity? We're absolutely destroying it on every single continent where there's massive human populations. Biodiversity is being destroyed. So what can we do about it? Well, obviously, education is very important. But mostly our education is about sitting in classrooms, learning about theory about biodiversity, graphs about biodiversity, equations about biodiversity. That doesn't really help. That just connects with the head, but it doesn't connect with the heart. In order to connect with the heart, we have to fall in love with biodiversity.
You know, it's interesting when we look at the world around us to realize how significant human beings have been in terms of design. Design is one of the incredible creative facilities that the human species has. But what we have to remember is that the design is also bad as well as good. And unfortunately, in the last few hundred years, we've demonstrated how our arrogant design species has created so much difficulties in the world.
So when you're interacting all those three different parts, for me it has been really about thinking how ecology and design work. Because ecology is looking at the relationships of the natural world and seeing how they interact. And design is looking at the process and the function of things, and how a design process might
create an outcome. So, and that's our signature, really. So how can we create design processes, that match ecological systems, or not match, but are more congruent with natural systems, that allow us to live in a world that isn't neglecting those things, that is not neglecting, the stories of our past, the connections with the natural world.
Tracking the social and ecological dimension of a place has been an incredibly important part of my thesis, as it has allowed me to deepen my understanding of people and how people influences place, and how place influences people. So after my time after Schumacher College, where I studied ecological design thinking, it was interesting to go to Brazil with that mindset, the change of mindset that allowed me to experience both the people and place, and to ask questions about how each is connected to the other, because one is not separate from the other, they are both in relationship. So within Brazil, I traveled down the Amazon River and met with local indigenous people and tried to understand their way of life, and to really listen to their context and really listen to the way in which the natural world influences their way of life. And so I've also been here in the Cederberg Mountains looking at the same sort of issues that they might face in terms of social and ecological relationships. And it's been interesting to compare both, and compare and track both what it's like in the Amazon and here in the Cederberg Mountains, and how children of the Amazon are not very different from the children of the Cederberg, and how they have an innate love of the natural world, an innate biophilic tendency that allows them to be so connected to the natural world. And so it's been very interesting to deepen my interest in tracking and deepen this understanding of tracking the social context within a natural space. Within my time in Brazil, I went and visited a number of landfill sites and the communities that live within them.
A gente atualmente trabalha hoje com 42 pessoas, fazendo toda a separação do lixo seco que o DML1 nos traz. Então, ele traz o lixo, a gente faz a separação, compacta, vende e no final de mês transforma o salário de todos os associados.
This quote by Carl Jung really brings to light the issues that are hidden from society, and how we close ourselves off to the waste that gets pushed to the corners of our cities. The time in these communities outside the city was an amazing time for me to learn about the people that are organizing our waste, and how their lives are, and how they perceive their world.
E gosto daqui, não gosto em casa, minha vontade tá aqui. Em casa eu não me sinto bem.
Meu nome é Mônica, eu trabalho com terrários, participando de várias feiras alternativas, surgiu a oportunidade de trabalhar com latinhas, material reciclado, vidros, e eu pinto as latinhas, coloco um enfeitezinho, uma fitinha, com suculentas e cactos.
This quote by Aldo Leopold opens up our relationships to ourselves and the people in which we work with, and the products in which we create from the natural world. In the south of Brazil, I went to a factory called Merca, which collects the latex from the trees in the Amazon rainforests and other places, and brings them to a factory in the south, where they then create products. In terms of ecological design thinking, it was important for me to listen to the relationship of the people that are building these products, and how they interact with each other within the factories. It was also very important to see how this relationship with the land was, and how they are collecting the latex from the trees. Outside of the city of Porto Alegre, I had the privilege of living in a small holding agricultural community.
Nós estamos aqui nessa propriedade há 15 anos. É uma propriedade pequena, são 2 hectares, e nós fizemos parte de um grupo que é a Rama. São em torno de 50 famílias que fazem parte do grupo. Não precisava vir aqui. São produtores e transformadores ou processadores que plantam e vendem a maioria dos produtos na forma direta nas feiras da cidade. Hoje, mesmo para venda nas feiras, os produtores têm que ser cadastrados no mapa. Então nós nos reunimos, eram várias associações informais e que se juntaram. Não dá para propor para ser.
My time in Brazil took me to many, many different places, and it was through these experiences and feeling the parts of different places that really allowed me to learn. And the Amazon was one of the first places that I was introduced to, and I cannot even describe in words the beauty that this land holds and the inherent social system that is a part of it. My time here, I really learned how to connect with my emotions because I couldn't understand any of the language that these people were speaking. Although I didn't speak their language, I still connected with them in a way that I could never have expected. The emotional intelligence is a very powerful tool of connection, and sitting next to the river fishing piranhas out of the river and jumping into the rivers and waterfalls with some of the older boys was a connection and an experience I'll never forget. And learning how the children sat along the banks of the river and played, and this was their ecosystem, this was their playground. Vagalumi was an inspiring organization that decentralized itself along the banks of the Amazon River and to other parts of Brazil such as the Pantanal. And they were going to communities and bringing library books to try and inform the kids on education and to inform them on storytelling of the natural world. It was so interesting to move to the different communities and learn about how these communities are experiencing their life, and to see how their way of seeing and their perception is very different to the community maybe just next door. What was also inspiring about Vagalumi was that they were connecting the kids from the Amazon to the kids in Sao Paulo who live in the big urban landscapes. This connection is a must because it is important for them to understand their context. The most difficult part of this experience was to learn about how development practices such as Belo Monte was going to be impacting on not only the ecological systems but the social systems itself, and to learn how these social systems had to then become dependent on Western thinking and Western development. I was extremely privileged to also experience the Pantanal. What a beautifully diverse and rich ecosystem, home to the jaguar and many other different species. The biggest difficulty I had in the Pantanal was coming to the realization of how much cattle there is and how much cattle is growing within this region, and to think about the loss of biodiversity that might be created because of this. This is a phenomenon that is happening all over the world, and I think if we don't pay attention to this issue, we are going to lose huge parts of our ecosystem and lose the keystone species that help with what George Monbiot talks about within trophic cascades. After the Pantanal, I was given the unique opportunity of going to stay at the Mata Atlântica rainforest. I lived in a community called Legado de Aguas, and the most interesting experience here was meeting the social context. In the rural community there, I met this lady who was weaving baskets out of bamboo, and it was incredible to see how great her craft was and how important it was that we listened to her and her context and how she might be able to bring economic value to this place.
Ah, saiu bastante ontem já, né? Ontem na festa saiu.
Saiu muito?
Saiu. A peneira de arroz saiu.
After this experience, the next thing I knew, I was boarding the flight back to Cape Town. Wow, my nerves were shot as I was so excited to get back to my home country and to my family. I had spent 3 months just deep within the self and thinking about the world and thinking about where I can take ecological design thinking. What an opportunity to get a job back in the Cederberg Mountains where I was for 4 months last year. My role here was to take some of the grade 10 boys tracking and hiking through these mountains and learning about the social context of a place. We took them to a local community. We went to the school and had interaction between the young children and the grade 10 boys. And here we are today learning from the local people as part of the social context and how do we begin to understand and listen to the people of this place. The more that we can begin to understand this place and hear its stories, the more that we can learn about the history and the inheritance of this land. And it's extremely important, I believe, to track this social context within this ecological system because they are directly influencing each other. So within the thesis, I look at the sense of place connected to the ecological systems.
Like as a society as a whole, we should be able to connect with them because they've been living here longer than we have. So for us to come here and try and learn about the land, it's probably going to be harder, but if we speak to the people, it's actually easier. They know the land, they've been living here for centuries, their ancestors roamed here. So yeah, Westerners should actually connect with the people more to see what the land's like, see what the ecology is like. Yeah, it's a really good idea.
These experiences of meeting people within their place and seeing how the place influences the people have been extremely significant as they tell us a lot about ourselves as a culture and a race, but also they tell us how we might be able to move forward.
Okay, my opa en my oma hulle hier op die plaas gewoon. En hulle het ook gewerk hier op die plaas. Daai tyd toe hulle nog geleef het, toe was hier geboer met perskes, druiwe, pere en appels. Hier was ook koeie, skape en varke. Daai alles was hier so. Dat ons altyd daar is 'n dapkraal, daar teen die pad, dat ons altyd daar by die kraalmuur gaan sit en gekyk hoe ons oupas die skape dap. En dit was vir ons wonderlik om dit te kan aanskou. Dit was baie lekker geweest om hier op die plaas groot te kan geraak het. Maar nou het dit mos nog verander, is nou nie appels en pere en diere nie, is nou net wyndruiwe wat nou hier voortgaan.
Okay, so we've just been learning about the social context of this area and how people are connected to the landscape. And now we're moving into the next chapter, which is tracking the ecological mindset of a place. So let's go tracking. We need to keep quiet, guys, because if we're making a noise, the animals are going to run away from us. So
just stop talking.
So let's go. Tracking the mindset has been a very interesting chapter to do over this thesis, as it has brought me into a way of seeing that not only humans see, so really trying to see the way in which a leopard walks its landscape and why it walks the landscape and what needs does it have, and to understand how it is connected to its ecosystem. This quote by Aldo Leopold is extremely important, as George Monbiot is brought into his book Feral about how predators are very important for ecosystems and they help regulate the ecosystem. This leopard walking in front of us now creates a huge shift in the ecosystem that it walks, because it creates landscapes of fear. It forces other animals to move to other parts of the wilderness because they are too nervous to be around the areas where it last got attacked by that leopard. Therefore, these landscapes of fear create a much greater diversity of life because the plant life is able to regrow. Arnie Ness and Stephen Harding brought me into this world of deep ecology and has allowed me to see the intrinsic value that is everywhere in the world, from the rocks to the atmosphere to the birds, the bees and the flowers. And I want to bring in this model that Stephen Harding created, teaching me how deep experiences might help us to deeply question the world we live in. A deep experience with the natural world may help us to deeply question the way in which we live within our ecosystems, which may allow us to create deep commitment to creating the change we wish to see in the world. This might bring us back to a deep experience that allows us to then move forward. An example of how a deep experience has changed my way of seeing was when I was at Londolozi Game Reserve and I was walking on my own in the bush and I came across two cheetah. The cheetah didn't run away from me as they sat looking over the savannah. These few moments with the cheetah helped me to really question myself to the natural world and what our connection as a human species is to the world. And so it brought me to a deep commitment of learning about how leopards and cheetah and other animals are connected to their landscapes and what is the world that they live in and how do they perceive it. With this idea that a deep experience might help us find some of the hidden secrets of the natural world, we took the grade 10 Bishop's boys out into the mountains to have direct experiences with nature. And as we were walking through the bush, one of the boys came across a small snake. And it was great to see the reaction that these boys had to this snake, because it was no longer a picture in a book, it was animate, it was alive. And through this experience, they might question their relationship to the snake and the way in which the snake perceives its world. This may over time become an influencing factor that might create a deep commitment that they have to connecting with the natural systems that live around them in their social context.
For me it was great to see them explore. I could really see that they enjoyed it a lot, and for them to experience it on their own, for them it felt like they were basically learning a lot because they wanted to, because it felt like it came from them. They weren't forced to learn something, I think that's an excellent method of learning, is to send the kids on their own and let them explore on their own and come to you afterwards and ask you questions about this type of footprint or this animal or about the type of rocks, I think that's the best way to learn. It's so boring to learn out of a book, just see the pictures. Okay, it's cool to see, wow, that's how a snake looked like, but I think to actually walk into the bush and see, a cobra or a fourth adder, I think that experience would be, I would definitely remember that experience.
Louis Liebenberg wrote the book The Art of Tracking. In his book he said, "Generally speaking, one may argue that science is not only a product of objective observation of the world through sense perception, it is also a product of the human imagination. A creative hypothesis is not found or discovered in the outside world, it comes from within the human mind." This idea of the imagination and the human mind really reminds me of the time I had with Stephen Harding in the Dartington forests. We would walk through the forest talking about the animals that used to be here and tracking those mindsets and really tell us more about the landscape. So the imagination is a powerful tool that we can use to learn about what the past looked like and what did the land look like when it was inhabited by all these beasts and other animals. And it can also be a tool to look into the future, to imagine how we might integrate ourselves back into an ecosystem that is more rich with biodiversity. And so walking into the Cederberg Mountains with the grade 10 boys and imagining the landscape of what it had 2,000 years ago, and then imagining forward to what might the Cederberg look like when your children walk this land, was very, very insightful and powerful experience for the boys. The main reason we are experiencing such a loss of biodiversity around the world is because of our lack of understanding and our fear that we are having with the natural world. In order for us to create the change that we wish to see in the world, we need to fall in love with biodiversity. We need to understand how the leopard walks its landscape and how it creates the trophic cascades that it does. Tying tracking the mindset and ecological learning through direct experience, it is interesting for us to try and learn how we could talk about these concepts of deep ecology, systems thinking, and complexity whilst being in the experience of the natural world. How can the natural world teach us these concepts that we have in theory? Gaia theory suggests that the Earth is a living organism and was coined by Dr. James Lovelock. The word Gaia comes from the Greek goddess, which means mother of all. Think for a moment that you are now floating in space, looking back at the Earth. Everything that you've known your whole life exists on this Earth. The beautiful sunsets, the amazing sunrises, everything has been experienced on this blue dot. So let's get to know our mother a little bit better. The Gaia hypothesis explains that the biota is in direct relationship with the abiotic environment. And through this direct relationship, there is an emergent self-regulation, which allows the earth to create the conditions conducive to life. Therefore, everything is alive and animate, and is interacting with each other to create these conditions. This significance can help us define what is really going on and what is happening on our beautiful planet. How are we able to live in these beautiful conditions of life and experience it with all the many different animals? The self-regulation of the planet can be compared to the human body. As our bodies try to regulate at 37 degrees Celsius, so does our earth regulate to create these conditions that allow us to live. The experience of the nighttime is something that I haven't spent a lot of time with until I started this thesis. And to stop and listen to the animals that move around at night, from the owl to the leopard to the many animals of the Pantanal, allowed me to try and experience their perception of the world and how moving below the stars at night might be for them. To conclude on this chapter, as it is still very alive in me now, is to stop and listen to the nighttime, because we've become such day creatures that we forget to listen to how the night can teach us many things about the earth itself and the many organisms that inhabit the earth at nighttime. Tracking the stories of our past has been a very important part of my thesis, as it has allowed me to learn about how people were connected to their natural systems many years ago, and how they learnt from their natural systems through storytelling. And so sitting in the Cederberg Mountains underneath the rock art with the grade 10 Bishop's boys and telling them the stories of the Bushmen was very, very important and real for my learning. Not only was I learning the stories of the Bushmen, but I was also moving down the Amazon River, learning about how the children were connected to the pink dolphins, the anacondas, and the many different animals that live on the Amazonian River. And it was this understanding of story that deeply allowed me to see the natural systems and to see how the people were connected to them. The children learnt about their landscapes through the stories that their parents told them. In terms of ecological design thinking, tracking the stories of our past has been important because when we design for something, we need to understand the inherent value that the land had and the value that the social systems had to that. And through storytelling, we learn a lot about a culture and we learn a lot about a connection that people once had to the land. This connection has been lost because of our Western way of thinking that is very disconnected from the natural systems. The story of the hippo is one of my favorite stories from the Bushmen. And the story goes that the hippo was once a land animal that used to walk the landscapes. But one day it started to realize that he was really getting burnt all the time, and he was so hot and so tired of being burnt in the sun. And he was jumping from tree to tree, and he would walk past the watering holes and see the alligators swimming in the water, and he would be so jealous. And he'd walk up to the water and say, "Hello, alligator. Man, please can I come and swim in the water with you? It's so hot out here." And the alligator was like, "No, you can't come out, you can't come and swim in this water because you're just going to eat all of the fish." And so the hippo turned away and walked away slowly, and he was so sad. And he went and sat under a big tree and he thought about a plan. He was like, "What am I going to do now? Because I can no longer handle the sun. It's just burning me and burning me." So he came up with an idea and he said, "Okay, I'm going to go and meet with the gods." The three gods, which were the kingfisher, the fish eagle, and the otter. And so he plucked up his courage and he went and he spoke to the gods. And he asked the gods, "Gods, I'm getting really burnt in the sun and I really cannot handle running from shade to shade all the time. Please, please may I go into the water and live in the water and become a water creature." And the gods looked at him and said, "No ways. Are you mad? You're going to eat everything. You're going to eat every single fish in the river." And so the hippo said, "I promise you I won't. You trust me. Just give me one chance. One chance. I will not eat any of your fish. I will come out at night time and eat the grass." So the gods had a little talk and they chatted about the situation of the hippo, and they felt a little bit sorry for him because they could see that he was bleeding from the sun. So they allowed the hippo to enter the water. They gave him one chance. And so the hippo lives in the water to this day. And to prove to the gods that he was not eating any of the fish in the rivers or the watering holes, he spread his dung amongst the earth to show that there were no fish bones within his dung. And so the hippo today lives in the watering holes, happy, comes out at night time and grazes. And this is one of the stories that the Bushmen had. The significance of this story, told underneath the rock paintings for the grade 10 boys, was much more engaging for them than if I was just giving them facts. A poem that resonated for me throughout my travels in England, Brazil, and South Africa was a poem called Lost by David Wagner. Stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree of a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. The greatest insight that I had during this experience of my thesis was that academia should not contribute to the whole of our learning, but it should just be a part of it. Sitting inside, behind closed doors, and reading about the world around us is not going to allow us to experience it and to really understand what is going on. In order for us to really make a difference in terms of climate change, in terms of loss of biodiversity, we need to begin to feel and experience the world again, not just through the rational mind, but through the sensory and the intuition. Allow academia to move in a way that is more action-based, that allows us to connect with the people so that the words that we read in the book may resonate with them too, and that we may share knowledge and decentralize it through our networks and become like mycelium is in the ground and begin to grow as an ecosystem, as a family, together as one. So to conclude on this train of thought of how eco-literacy might influence a direct experience, let's begin to bring the children out into the natural world so that they can learn the nature in the flesh, in the 3D, so that they can begin to have a greater connection with them and deepen their relationship with it so that they want to make the change, not because they have to, because they see the need of the relationship. When we begin to find this, we may then be able to look up at the stars again in awe and wonder and begin to see our place in the universe and see our significance and see our home, planet Earth, is where we need to be and where we belong. Ecological design thinking is a way of life. It's a way of connecting back to the rational, sensual, feeling and intuitive mindset that then allows us to connect with the self and realize our self-value and our self-realization to continue the work in the world that allows us to live truly and fully in the experience of life.
Hello everyone, here we are at Malgat in the Cederberg with my good friend Matthias and Johnny behind the camera, and I just wanted to send a big thank you to everyone out there, because this video would not be anything without any one of you, and so thank you all very much. You know, from the moment I left the Sustainability Institute to Londolozi Game Reserve, to the Cape Leopard Trust, to Schumacher College, to those beautiful Muito Bom people in Brazil, thank you so much for all your love and support. All the best in the future.
My family are the reason why I am the person I am today. So I want to send all my love to my mom, who would, I believe, love what I am doing now, to my stepmom Michaela Strachan, who this trip to Schumacher College would not have been possible, and to my dad, who has always supported me in every single venture that I've taken, and finally to my brothers and sister who have been with me throughout my childhood and experienced the many beautiful parts of South Africa together.